Hello there, and welcome to the 18th episode of Trek Prime. We're just 2 away from 20, aren't we? I've got something really special I want to plan for the 20th, but we got something tonight that, we talked about it last week, but we talked about Star Trek TOS and the flavor of each season and abstracted on it, as we often do. But today we're going to talk about something that is related to TOS, but at the same time, it isn't exactly TOS. As Dr. Evil and Austin Powers would say, just 1 calorie. It's related, but not. And they're the 2 Star Trek pilots, I don't know about you, when I was younger, I always would transpose the term pilot with the first episode of the show, and they're not.
Yeah.
A lot of times TV shows will do a pilot and we'll never see it at all.
Yeah.
And we'll see the first episode of a show, but the pilot is something the network sees and they change things around and we see a complete show. And then later on, the pilot is aired in a special presentation. I Love Lucy did this, if you remember. They had a pilot with Lucy and Ricky that looked nothing like the original show that we didn't see, but it's how it was presented to them. And they did a first episode that became the world we knew. Star Trek was very much like this. Now, the first Star Trek pilot was worked into an episode of TOS called The Menagerie. We all know that. Yep. And it was called The Cage. Now, I just had this little fun idea. I would like to talk about our memories of first seeing The Cage, both of us, because I have vivid ones of them. I wanted to know if you had any memories of when you first saw The Cage in your life, when you first saw this first pilot.
Want me to go first?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, I'll tell you what. Of course, my first episode that I saw of Star Trek was Doomsday Machine.
Right.
So I had to wait till I had to go all the way back around, and, to see.
You were watching it in the 70s a little bit too. What was it 80s by then? Because.
Yeah, I think it was like I was like in third grade, I guess, when I started watching that. Second grade, I think.
Okay.
Yeah.
So when did The Cage first come into your life, or what happened?
I only remember my first memory of seeing The Cage was in the 80s when I started watching it. I don't remember seeing it before that because I might not have seen every episode when I was a kid because I was outside doing stuff. So my first time remembering The Cage was when I was at home watching it when I was in junior high. And it kind of caught me off guard because I knew it was Star Trek, but then there was a different man sitting in the captain's chair or something. And I was like, wait a minute, what is this? And then, I saw all these different people, and then there was Spock. I remembered Spock, but he looked so different. His outfit was different, and the bridge looked different. It was like more silvery and gray. There wasn't much color in it. The bridge doors weren't painted red. It was just gray, and it was darker. And it had weird sound effects. It didn't have the same old sound effects that we learned, remember seeing. It had different ones,
Right.
And then they had that transporter from hell there that had a train engine in it when it was idling.
We're getting a little ahead of ourselves here because I did want to mention that a bit later.
Yeah.
So this is
it just rumbled when it was
I
idling.
didn't shut you down. I was just saying that because
Yeah.
I wanted to get into that as we talk about The Cage, but now that you mention it, you've opened up that door because that transporter is something that's going to be a little internal conversation here because it's its own world of pilot weirdness, which we see on pilots in general because pilots are often strange in comparison to the series used to be. Like the character might be an absolute goofus on the show, but in the pilot might be really elegant, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
That if you know about The Simpsons, they did a story about a pilot that had that exact thing happen.
Yeah.
A character that started out really suave in some TV pilot and ended up being a goofus. And there's another point of the story, but yeah. So anyway, with The Cage, my first memory of it is actually really weird. Do you remember that Star Trek 20th anniversary calendar from 1986?
Barely. I don't remember.
Well, it was something I got.
Okay.
And there were episodes from TOS in it. Pictures from TOS. And of course, one of them was The Cage. And I saw Spock and this guy who was addressed as Captain Pike. And that's when my mother explained to me about this show called The Cage. Wait a minute, it was a 20th anniversary calendar that came out for 1987.
Okay.
It came out in the 20th anniversary, but it was 87. So it was 87. I think this was March, April.
Okay.
And my mother at that point was keeping up more with Star Trek than I was because, she was like 27. So, I would say I was like a little kid. And she was explaining to me about how they had a pilot and they worked that into an episode. I hadn't seen that episode yet. But she said, they're going to be putting out the pilot on tape. Yeah, I remember when things would come out on tape. You do too?
VHS, yeah.
Yeah, for all you people out there who are under 25, things used to come out on tape. So, it was nothing to be nostalgic about. Those tapes weren't that great sometimes, but that's what we used to get. So we had no downloads, no DVDs, no nothing. So just.
And we had the option of removing commercials off those things when we wanted to.
Yes, we had that option. That was good, even though the tape Betamax was clearly better. I never had them, but they were anyway. So I was going to turn this into a Format Wars episode here, but yeah. And here's the weird thing about the cage. I remember my birthday came up and I said, I want to get this cage tape. I was so excited about it. I was 7 years old. So when I get the cage tape, I have it in the house with me. I should have it in this, but it's buried underneath a whole bunch of basement grotesquerie or whatever. But on the cover, it's this great, you see this green woman, kind of in this middle of this dance, and you see Captain Pike on the cover with that blonde Vina, and the Telosians and the Enterprise in that castle. It looks like a cover of some really grand book the way they present it.
Yeah.
So you turn it on. That was my first time seeing Gene Roddenberry. If you remember that intro to that Cage VHS.
Yeah, no, I think I do remember now. Yeah.
And I got to tell you about Gene. When I first saw him and heard him talk, I'd heard about the great bird of the galaxy, and he was not quite the man I physically expected.
He has the voice that reminds me of Mr. Rogers when he would talk.
Yes,
exactly.
He sounded like some guy on Romper Room. I expected this man to come on and be very elegant and be very Patrick Stewart-like.
Yeah.
And he comes on sounding more or less like Winnie the Pooh.
Yeah, he's a big guy from what I understand.
Yeah,
he's a big man.
Yeah, he was not. I thought the great bird was going to be this physical specimen of something.
Works from the Addams Family or something.
Right. This unusually godlike person, and this fella comes out. That's Gene Roddenberry. That's really this great bird. This is not what I was expecting. In 7 years old.
Yeah.
You think everybody bigger than you is invincible sometimes,
Yeah.
And then Gene Roddenberry comes like, that could be my school principal.
Yeah.
That's the vibe I get. I didn't.
Very unassuming,
It's like some guy. I thought, is that some narrator? I said, that's Gene Roddenberry? And he said, oh, you just had some Star Trek movies. And now that I look back at Gene, because you can get that version on Netflix now with if you want to see it, it's there. And he's talking about how they rejected the pilot and how he was trying to do things in Star Trek. And he says, well, maybe this has to let it pass because it all seems so make-believe. And he's saying it in this Winnie the Pooh, Mr. Rogers Disney voice.
Yeah.
He sounds like a Disney narrator. He doesn't sound anything.
Yeah.
I expected him to be like Patrick Stewart, You
certainly couldn't picture him as a cop, which he was, but you couldn't.
No, he came off as a Disney type of guy. He didn't have. I expected a Patrick Stewart type guy with this very Centaurian British accent and Aryan accent and being very elegant and tea Earl Grey hot sort of guy. I expected a big regal Hollywood figure, and instead he just seems like somebody's dad or somebody's principal or a teacher.
Yeah.
Just like somebody who would be in my school. It was not the man I expected.
Yeah, very ordinary,
And I'm thinking, okay, I thought, okay, Gene's going to come out, he's going to be, he's a big adult, he's scary. But it was not. It's like, no, he could be my principal, And so that was my first impression of Gene, Yeah. And then he's all of a sudden says, well, we put it into the Menagerie, which he referred to, by the way, as the two-part movie. I find that interesting. He referred to it as a two-part movie, as a TV movie, very 60s terminology. And then he said, parts of this are going to be in color, parts of it are going to be in black and white. So I'm saying, what is this going to be exactly? I had this vision I was going to be watching a show where you'd see a color part and then a thing go boop and then go to black and white. No.
Yeah.
They somehow bled color footage and black and white footage into each other really seamlessly into this thing I've never seen before and never seen since. I've never seen a TV show presented like that. And the pilot looked a lot grainier. The voice of some of the characters were different, which we'll get into as we get into it a little bit more. But that's my first experience with the Cage. My first experience with Gene Roddenberry, because I'd never seen the man before.
Yeah.
I heard about him, but it's this mythical kind of figure, like he's the great bird. He's this puppet master doing we talked earlier about the way people like Harlan Ellison describe him. Yeah. And that's kind of how I saw him. And it's like, oh my gosh, he's this elusive person you don't see. And when I see him, I thought, oh, okay. Even in the 60s, he never had that. He seemed like somebody's dad or something.
Yeah.
He didn't seem like, but then again, when you see George Lucas, he doesn't seem like, or Spielberg, they don't seem like big people either. I mean, certainly, because you see people like Louis B. Mayer, and they're huge and larger than life, and they loom over things, or Cecil B. DeMille. Gene Roddenberry wasn't those people. The people involved in TV after that didn't seem to have that huge Olympic quality. They just were more unassuming. But yeah, so let's talk about what the Cage basically is. Okay, we have Jeffrey Hunter as the first starship captain. Now, if I recall, Dorothy Fontana had said even the Cage was an abstraction of another idea about a ship called the Yorktown, right?
Yeah. Yep.
And it was supposed to be commanded by a man named Robert April. Now, Jeff, I don't know if you have the original Star Trek encyclopedia that came out in the 90s, but when they mentioned Robert April, the picture next to it is a picture of Gene Roddenberry wearing a Cage uniform.
That's right. Yeah.
I always find that cute that they kind of assumed he'd be Robert April somehow.
Yeah, because I don't think they had an idea of how he would look like. So I think they just did sort of a, kind of a homage.
Roddenberry ever wore a Star Trek outfit on the set. I never seen that picture.
I think they just superimposed his head over.
You think that was a Photoshop?
It could have been, because it didn't look like the body type didn't seem to match to his head, and the body that it was sitting on didn't seem to match. But I think it was just a quick Photoshop thing, just to fill in the who.
Unless
he
he
looked
did
like.
wear a Star Trek outfit just to test them out or something.
He looked too. I think they got the picture when he was older. So I don't. If he looked younger and they put him in that uniform, I would have said, yeah, it was probably just he took the shirt and put it on.
But 70s though, the picture.
Yeah, but he was older, and I don't think they even had those uniforms at that time. They probably just chucked them or whatever they did with them. So
yeah, I think some of those Cage uniforms at the Museum of Television or something, or is it just a regular?
I think just the one. They had just the one. I think that Hunter wore.
Yeah, Pike's one. Yeah.
Yeah.
So okay, first thing I'm going to mention, Captain Pike has been in the newer iterations of Star Trek, but those are essentially very different Captain Pikes. I'll just say that they're not the same Captain Pike. It's you and use. The Captain Pike that we saw, at least as far as I'm concerned, you may have a different idea, is nothing like James T. Kirk or James R. Kirk, which we'll get into a little bit later.
Yeah.
Or any of William Shatner's iterations of whatever, of Kirk. Yeah. Pike is depicted as a man who's been through a lot, who has just been on this mission. I don't know if the Enterprise was on a 5-year mission or just different missions at that time, to Rigel 7, where members of his crew have been killed, and he seemed to be burned out.
Yeah.
He had this yeoman who was new, who he seemed to not like.
She looked very young.
Right, and he was almost abusive to her. He just was hostile to her. And
yeah, and I guess at the time, it was sort of like maybe they were playing off this idea about women being,
maybe.
I don't know. But then he had a female first officer, though.
Where they had number one on the bridge, and he makes this remark, well, I'm not used to having a woman on the bridge, and she gives him a dirty look.
Yeah.
And then he says, well, nothing personal, Lieutenant, you're different, of course, and he gives him another dirty look.
Yeah. He
almost to say, so you assume because I'm a strong female character, I'm more like a man. I would love to have heard that dialogue, but she looks at him like, you should know better than to say that because you've had me here, and I'm clearly not a man.
Yeah, I mean, it's a line you would never hear today on any Star Trek today.
So, to be honest with you, this is a very different flavor so far than Star Trek. The characters are a little more conflicted. You mentioned darker ship. It's a darker mood at first because Captain's burned out. He's not pleased with anybody on his ship. Basically, he goes into his quarters, which has a TV set in it, which we've talked about. And he calls in the doctor, who is also somehow a counselor, who's also a bartender. So he brings him this drink, and he's saying, I don't want to command the ship anymore. I'm tired. I want to take a rest leave. So he gives him this inspirational speech about how you have to go out and take life for what it is or wither away from it, which is actually very Star Trek in its theme.
Yeah.
So what happens is they end up finding the wreckage of this ship that they're supposed to be looking for, which they found on their circuit. In the beginning, you hear, I call it loud Spock. First you hear Spock screaming for no apparent reason. So the first dialogue in Star Trek is Spock screaming, check the circuit! That's the first dialogue is screaming Spock.
Yeah.
Who I don't think is a Vulcan quite yet in the script. I think maybe they still have the idea that he's sort of a Martian. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, he's showing motion. Yeah, I mean, he had emotions and stuff you could see, but
so anyway, they find this planet. They know about it. Spock knows about the Talus star group. They find this Class M planet. Now we get to the part that you were mentioning. They're going to beam down. So they go into the transporter room, and the first thing you see is not the transporter. You hear dum 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 dum. Like a generator pumping.
Yeah, I mean, it's like you got the set, the transport room, and it's sitting on top of a train motor, or something like, like one of them the old '70s subways from New York City and all.
And they have two guys, and I noticed this the other day. They were manipulating the controls, and when they pushed a button, you heard the sound of a torpedo firing.
Yeah,
you're like that. Like a torpedo going.
Yeah, I mean, all these sounds,
all these sirens, and they sit in the transporter room for a millennium.
Yeah, and remember when they got into the transporter pad, how close their head was to the ceiling?
These things are going to come over their heads and just like suck them up or something, and then
it's like.
I mean, this is how primitive this actually was at this point. And then all of a sudden, the transporter effect starts, but it makes this really piercing shriek. It's like, laser, like, it doesn't sound like that jingling transporter sounds. It's like a harsh laser, which takes forever to activate. Yeah. They're wearing these giant backpacks for one thing. I guess in that time they have backpacks they're wearing. So they came down to this planet, and of course Spock sees these little. They look like lily pads on or little Japanese plants.
Like little blue leaves.
Right, and Spock touches them. He's like, like confused by a little plant.
They're singing plants or something.
Right, and of course they're making the transporter effect, if I remember.
Yeah, that sound was actually the transporter effect they used later.
Right. Not that music. It was that. It was that later that like dingly sound. So they use the explosion plan. So then they think they meet up with the people on the ship, and they talk about this secret they have, and then they disappear. Except these aliens come out, take Captain Pike. They fire these hand laser phaser things at them, and the episode revolves around the crew of the Enterprise trying to get them back. And what happens is he's been taken by this race that has survived a war that cannot reproduce, and they're trying to build this culture of different enslaved species to repopulate their planet, and using powers they've developed of illusion to try to turn Captain Pike on with this young woman named Vina. Yeah. So the people at NBC rejected this show as too cerebral. And when I look back at it now, it's kind of a psychosexual drama now that I think about it.
Yeah, sort of, I
guess. Because Pike is basically they're trying to get him interested in this female character by exposing him to different kind of fetishes.
Yeah.
There's different fantasies about what he wanted. It's about seduction fantasies. It's almost like some alien. It's like something on Logan's Run,
Yeah.
Remember in Logan's Run, Farrah Fawcett was in that new you thing where they could reconstruct your face, and they had that weird orgiastic area where there were all these weird things happening, these kind of weird sexual things.
Exactly.
It was kind of like they were trying to create this thing where he'd save her life, or he'd be turned on by her dancing in green makeup.
Yeah.
And it was just, I don't know if NBC had an articulation for anything like that at that time. I mean, Twilight Zone was kind of there, but this is a little different for sci-fi as a series. I mean, as they were presenting it. And of course, in the end, he finds out that Vina herself is an illusion, that she's actually an extremely malformed survivor, who for some reason he does not take back to the ship with him.
Well, actually, the reason becomes clear, when in Menagerie, why he wanted to go back to Talos 4 in the first place, because he was deformed, remember, from what happened to him.
Which I found weird, because initially he acted like, and I found this is very unstarted. It's like, oh, well, she's too deformed to take back to the ship with me. I don't like people that they look perfect.
It wasn't so much for him, it was for her. He was doing it for her because she didn't want to look that way to anybody else. She just wanted to maintain the illusion for herself that she was still beautiful and that she wasn't like that. So he figured she'd never be happy.
On the ship, he agreed with her reasons. So I guess maybe it was, because it just seemed weird, because he kind of looked at her when she presented herself, almost like, well, I know I can't take her back up the ship now. But like I said, this is a cerebral story. It's, in a lot of ways, it's closer to how The Next Generation was.
Mm.
You know, you had to think about this. Gene Roddenberry called it a wagon train to the stars. This wasn't much like a Western.
Mm.
This was, if you've seen the movie The Day the Earth Stood Still.
Yep, I did.
The original, Klaatu Barada and Nikto. It's much more like that, much more philosophical.
Yeah.
It's more straight philosophical. There's some space adventure. One thing about the space adventure aspect of it is that they have the ability on this Enterprise to divert their ship's power to this giant laser cannon that's down in the planet, which I find very great.
I never got that because see when in the episode, you know, when they were when they had that episode with Apollo, they zapped this thing from orbit. I mean, what the hell did they have to?
They could have just fired phasers on the planet and boom.
Yeah, I mean, why did they have to bring down this big piece of equipment, you know, or something? Just
right. They had to they bring this giant laser thing down, and then they had to. And then number one had to call over the communicator and say, "Oh, you can transfer power now." You know.
Yeah.
It's like they could have just fired phasers unless the ship didn't have them.
Yeah.
And, you know, the ship was very different too because they had 203 people and it didn't use regular warp drive; it used time warp.
Yeah, it had a time warp drive.
And they kept mentioning time warp and the time barrier being broken, but never really defining it. So apparently, the ship worked by somewhat different physics. It was an odd thing. But like I said, it's I really like.
And then remember the phasers when he tried to overload one? It seemed like it was going to take forever for that thing to burst. But and City on the Edge of Forever, that hobo takes one of the hand phasers and he just turns on and goes. And then
where Spike is trying to blow up that area.
Yeah.
You still can get on the ground, but I don't want to be. And it's like, woo. Oh, number one does that, right?
Yeah, and it was like going on and on. It's like,
remember that transporter too? It's like that transporter took forever to beam anybody up.
Yeah,
I mean, if that ship was going to blow up in like 10 seconds, that transporter would have been too late.
Yeah,
it was so slow on that ship. There was no instantaneous anything.
Maybe because the special effects couldn't be done as quickly on there.
Right. So it was done in 64, but they copyrighted it then, but it was done in 65, I guess. And apparently produced in color, from what I understand.
Yeah.
Yet the original pilot was in black and white. So I'm guessing they produced a color version, but they send NBC a black and white rough print.
Yeah. I wonder why they, like you said before at the beginning, sometimes they wouldn't air the pilots for the public to see, but this time they did, though. I mean, I wonder why they decided to air it and not just let the studio see it and go with their first episode after that, after the cage.
I don't know, but what it does say here is that another instance, if you see the black and white phase in out episodes, the Telosian characters on this planet are all by female actors. And in the color version, they all sound like female voices.
Mm-hmm.
But on the black and white scene, they have male voices.
Yeah.
Wikipedia does explain that the Telosians were portrayed by women and their telepathic voices were recorded by male actors.
Mm-hmm.
And this was done to give the impression that Telosians had focused their efforts on mental development to the detriment of physical strength and size, and also gave more of an alien feel.
One of my friends told me that the Telosians were like, they didn't have any gender. They were just, that they made the confusion that, of, like you said, a male voice with a female body, that they just didn't have a gender. It was that kind of race or something where they didn't have one.
So it looks like the guy who voiced the Telosian was a guy named Malachi Throne. But what happened is that when they redid it, they sped his voice up.
Yeah, well, he was in the episode The Menagerie where he was playing the Commodore in that episode.
And he was also in Star Trek The Next Generation playing, you'll never guess who?
Romulan.
He was Senator Pardek.
Yep.
So, so he's kind of a big deal in Star Trek, I guess. I didn't realize until now he was Pardek, so.
Yep.
I didn't realize that was the original Keeper voice.
Yep.
Which will explain it, because that first Keeper voice did sound a little like Pardek.
Yeah.
So, the cage, when I saw it in color, it was like just a menagerie, only the whole thing.
Yeah.
The menagerie is basically the cage with a courtroom wraparound.
Yeah.
Which is also an illusion, apparently. Most of it's an illusion. So
yeah.
So we saw the cage in that format on the series as that episode. Speaking of pilots that do get aired eventually, I guess that brings us up to the second one now, doesn't it? because they make a second pilot of Star Trek. And oh, by the way, I should add, Susan Oliver, the actress that played Vina, she had a really fascinating life. Apparently, in her middle years, she became a pilot.
Oh, really? Oh.
Yes, she had a really interesting life, and there's a book about her that I need to read it, and I encourage all of you to read it, because she apparently had a unique history. And, you know, I've never really seen her in anything else, but to be honest with you, she wasn't a bad character in The Cage, although I will say a little creepier than most Star Trek cohorts are. Because she's actually supposed to be this attractive young woman, but in reality, she's this... I would guess that, didn't they say that Vina was actually an adult crew member on the ship?
Or was she?
One said she was an adult crew
maybe a child, I think, or something like that. Because she's supposed to be older, I guess. And so,
right,
yeah.
One said she was on the registry of the ship as an adult crew member.
Yeah, so then she would have been older and deformed.
When you see her at the end, she not only looks deformed, she looks old.
Yeah.
So I'm guessing that when she was on the Columbia, whatever, she was probably in middle-aged.
Yeah.
So definitely not that young woman. And Susan Oliver was playing this young woman who seemed like she was a little wiser than her years should be. And she was very aware of her captivity and very aware of what was happening. Very philosophical about it. Things you wouldn't hear a young woman like that be.
Yeah.
You know, so it was interesting to see this character who was actually a total fabrication. She wasn't always she appeared. She was a woman who had been living for many years as a grown woman in bondage.
Yeah.
So, you know, these are kind of heavy themes for sci-fi in 1964. So I can kind of see how why NBC rejected it. This is like something you would have seen 10 years ago. This is a very different kind of thing.
Well, I mean, we watch it today, but we don't really see, you know, the controversy. But you got to go. You have to put yourself
right
back
now. It's not controversial at all because we've had Next Generation, we've had other things. But
you have to put yourself in the shoes of your parents, and you have to think how they saw it back then, and that was probably like kind of risque, you know, or something, you know.
Well, and not that too. The fact is that they had a woman in a high position on the ship, which would have been really good in 1964.
Yeah.
Gene Roddenberry claimed, I don't know how true it is, that female test audiences looked at number one and said, "Who does she think she is up there?"
Yeah.
Almost this envy that, you know, why can't we be up there? Almost this kind of anger at the whole idea.
Yeah.
And he decided, and NBC said we can't have that character on there because it's just going to cause too much trouble.
Yeah.
And they wanted Spock off of there because they thought he resembled the devil.
Yeah.
He said, "I'll make a deal with you. We can get rid of number one. We'll keep Spock on here."
Yeah.
You know, but we'll keep him screaming too. Which leads in the second pilot, which, okay. I just want to get some information up on this. So I believe the second pilot was made in 1965, shortly after they completed the first pilot, if I remember, a few months after that. The reason why I say that is because it says it was made in 65, and you used a lot of the Cage sets, and they just changed it around a little bit.
The bridge, it looks like they completely redesigned. I mean, because it was all different in that pilot, you know.
Right, but, you know, there was still some Cage-like looks to it. The Cage uniforms were somewhat similar to the Cage.
Yeah, a little bit, yeah.
It was not TOS yet, let's put it that way.
Yeah.
But there were some TOS people in it. Of course, we have William Shatner as James R. Kirk.
Yeah.
That kind of curmudgeonly. We'll get to that later.
And we had Sulu. He was
like
a mathematician. Yeah, he was a physicist. Yeah.
Right. And he had virtually, I don't know what he would have been on the ship at that point. I mean, Bridge doesn't have a physicist. He's just a guy on the ship.
Well, if you remember, Scotty was there too, and they kind of like stood in the background.
Right. He was a guy operating the transporter at that point.
Yeah.
Which, by the way, when we get to When No Man Is Gone Before, the transporter is much more like the TOS transporter we know.
Yeah.
It runs like it. Although, oddly enough, When No Man Is Gone Before has a different theme song. It's the same theme song, but it's done a little different.
They don't have the the narration from William Shatner at the beginning.
That and the do sounds a little more loungy. It's just a different feel to it. It's a different kind of feeling. The animation isn't the same. It looks more like TOS.
Which is why I think some fans consider that episode not part of the 5-year mission, simply because of the way it starts off.
It doesn't have our 5-year mission.
Yeah, it's just maybe just an individual mission that the ship had, you know.
Right, and in this episode, this basically, I mean, to boil When No Man Has Gone Before down, Would you say it more or less felt like a TOS kind of episode in the end of the day?
Yeah, it did. I mean, like you said, it had different effects and different stuff
And
like
the vibe
that.
was
Yeah, and
well,
I have to say one thing. When going back to the cage, the artwork, the background, the paintings that they would make, like when they were showing Hunter, kind of fighting that looked like a Viking there or something like that.
oh, the Galar.
Yeah, and they were going, and they was running towards where he was, and you could see
Yeah, that was a pretty nice painting.
It was, and that, and I have to say,
That was a nice painting they had for that.
yeah, I mean, it's hard to even see where the painting stops and the set begins. I
They
mean,
had that set with the castle on, and that painting in the background's pretty nice.
yeah, and they did the same thing when they did the second pilot when they beamed down on that planet, and you saw these tanks all the way down in the sort of.
So I don't think these pilots were necessarily low budget. They look like they had some intent put into some of it, like
Yeah, they really did a good job.
You always think of Star Trek as being kind of low budget and not having enough money. These pilots look like there was actually some effort and heart put into them.
Yeah, I mean, because you look at other sci-fi shows at the time, and you don't see that kind of artwork.
Right, they were really trying to create a world with this, and
yeah,
where no man has gone before. Basically, they're Spock, who's an established friend of Kirk's at this point.
Yeah.
Established at the beginning, they're playing chess and they have some relationship. Spock reveals himself to have human ancestry. He doesn't specify it. He says, an ancestor of mine married a human at one point. He didn't say it was his father.
Yeah. And he made it sound like it wasn't his father. It was like maybe like great-grandfather or something like that. Yeah. Ancestor.
About it. Yeah. And of course, you see that Kirk and Spock dynamic with Kirk being, oh yeah, terrible having bad blood like that, which is your typical Kirk Spock repartee. So you see the relationship being established really early on, that brotherly thing.
Yeah.
And they're looking for a ship that they got a distress beacon from, which is, I'm guessing from Zephram Cochrane's time, from where they put it, and or something around that line. The first ship to try to leave the galaxy, and they find the recorder, which has been damaged, and we go into a lot of Screaming Spock stuff.
Yeah, because he was getting that recorder and he was listening to what it was saying.
And then when they leave the galaxy, they find this huge pink galactic barrier thing, which is creating a lot of trouble. And they introduce a character into the show who had a relationship with Kirk, named Gary Mitchell. He was played by Gary Lockwood, who was in 2001. And they have Sally Kellerman, who's playing Dr. Daner, and she's a psychiatrist who's observing the ship. She's not a Counselor Troy type character. She's a guest psychiatrist who's observing the crew. She's not going to stay there first. And she's up on the bridge in the middle of a mission. I don't personally know why she's up there in the middle of a mission, but that's, I guess, their point. Yeah. But I guess Gary Mitchell, from what I'm gathering, he tried to flirt with her, but she rebuffed it.
Yeah.
Resulting in him, in him calling her a walking freezer unit.
Yeah.
Which we'll get back to that later, because that is going to come into play a little later in the episode. But anyway, what happens is that they get zapped by this thing, after we hear around a Screaming Spock, reflectors full intensity! Spock yelling his dialogue for some reason. I don't know why Nimoy had that mechanic at that time.
Yeah, I mean, the bridge wasn't that big. I mean, it wasn't like he was in a gymnasium. I mean, God, he'd have to shout everything across the room.
Spock was basically in Samuel L. Jackson mode at that time. He was just...
Well, not that bad. Holy shit.
No, not that intense, but he was...
Man. Holy shit.
I had to bring a Samuel L. Jackson thing up.
Jackson mode. Oh, God.
Not quite that loud, but...
God forbid.
It's getting clear out of being, but, I mean, still...
Yeah.
Sounding almost emotional. We'll pull Spock aside later, because he comes into play, too. So, what happens is Daner and Mitchell get knocked out, but Mitchell has these silvery eye issues, and all of a sudden his character changes from a random background character who's sort of like a regular person into this character who's suddenly very self-obsessed, who's starting to develop abilities that are not human, and very instantly getting obsessed with them.
Yeah.
Very fast. It's not like it's happening, so it's happening very fast. And his whole emotional character changes from being just an average person on the ship to being this kind of haughty, superior kind of character.
Yeah, it's sort of like Khan in a way.
Right, although Khan was always that way, but no.
But yeah, he was becoming that way, yeah.
He started to act in that way, but but he made a point. He says, like, a man who's been blind all of his life being given sight.
Yeah.
Because in the beginning, he's like a regular crew member. And here's the weird thing: when they're looking at the episode is about something called ESP, which I believe was disproved about 20 years ago. Interestingly enough, but at that time, ESP was a big discussion among a lot of people when I look back at it. So the idea was that this Gary Mitchell character and this Daner had a high level of ESP. And you remember when they were looking at their service records on the screen, and they showed them like for 3 seconds?
Yeah.
If we paused them and looked at those?
Yeah, I mean,
they're very full biographies, these characters.
Yeah.
And they talk about Gary Mitchell's history as always being very bright, always being prone to be interested in things like magic and stuff like that. So you see in this a character you didn't see in the beginning. You just saw an average member of the crew, where they show this propensity for that. Where with Dana, you sort of saw that she was kind of an intellectual person.
Mm-hmm.
Cerebral, cold, kind of like a Cage type character.
Yeah.
For all intents and purposes. Almost like number one all over again. Now, all of a sudden, the weird thing is once she gets zapped, all of a sudden she's totally defending him and being very emotional.
Yeah.
Her character is slowly changing, but she's talking about a mutated superior man might be a wonderful thing, which would not be what she'd say in the beginning at all.
Yeah.
So you see these characters already changing. And what ends up happening is the story ends up about, Mitchell becoming so powerful he could destroy the Enterprise. And Kirk has to kill him while he can. So their dilithium has been depleted. They have to go to this planet called Delta Vega, source of this beautiful map painting. Yep. And, Mitchell proceeds to go around. He kills one of the crew members, and Daner turns out to have the same ability. And all of a sudden, this walking freezer unit becomes infatuated with him. I wouldn't call it romantic. It was more like it's more like she was infatuated with him, and his thing was that I love my greatness and my power being admired by this person. Yeah. She's looking at me, it was all a narcissistic relationship.
Yeah.
It's like we're both a god, but I'm still a superior god. It was this very idolatrizing hero worship kind of relationship, and they had that sort of complexity. But in the end, as Gene Roddenberry pointed out later in life, it ended with that bare knuckle fist fight between him and Mitchell, in which Mitchell is actually forcing Kirk to pray to him.
James R. Kirk.
Well, yeah. Well, he deserves a decent burial at least, so he creates a gravestone, and which says infamously, if you don't start it later, it says James R. Kirk on it. Yeah. Now, you found somewhere there's an explanation outside of canon for this.
Well, yeah, if anyone even watches Star Trek Continues, it's on YouTube.
Right, the fan series, yeah.
Yeah. One of the final episodes, I think it was, I can't remember which one, but towards the end, they go back and they kind of revisit that whole thing that started it all. They kind of go back, and Kirk in that episode, he says that because the powers had made him so powerful and everything, Gary Mitchell so powerful that he forgot parts of his own history. He said it was so bad he forgot his middle name, his own middle name. So it was like, it was the reason why he put an R instead of a T there, because he just.
Well, that actually could go with it, because the whole episode is about, by the end of the show, the Mitchell.
And it kind of holds water, because in a way, remember when he fought him and he lost that silvery glow, and he was like, he kind of came to, and he was like.
Yeah, it's almost like, because the whole thing is that the Gary Mitchell with those powers was not essentially the same person as one without him.
Yeah, so when he had the powers, maybe parts of his history was gone to him. He didn't remember anything.
Well, there's another story I've heard about that. I think it was in a book somewhere, that he was actually possessed by an alien. That wasn't Mitchell at all. That was a character possessing his body.
Yeah.
Because when he lost that thing to his eye, he's like, "Oh, Jim," it's like he didn't know what happened. It was like he was a different person.
Yeah.
So I mean, like I said, I read the characters as being very different. Like those alien intelligence that possessed him and gradually took him over, like a body snatcher.
Yeah.
Because and it was very gradual. It wasn't something that happened at first. It was very gradual. You started to notice a change in his personality. Yeah. So it was very well written. But again, it had that Star Trek element of the. Now, remember we had Spock yelling and being very emotional. Let's take that Spock and unfreeze him from that point. At one point, Kirk is telling him, "Oh, can you try to feel it like you've got a heart or whatever?" And he said something about Daner and what she's going through. And Spock says, "Well, she feels, I don't. All I know is logic." Now, 30 minutes ago, he's screaming about deflectors. Interesting how your logic falters. But we're kind of And then, of course, what happens?
But they were kind of going on that path about how Vulcans
right, the half Vulcan thing.
Yeah, but they in the cage there was nothing.
Right, Spock was just some random alien
Yeah.
who screamed for no reason and smiled over little plants and stuff like that.
So I'm wondering if it was Leonard Nimoy who actually kind of wanted to go with that character in that direction by introducing.
In the second pilot, he's a Spock we know, more or less.
Yeah.
Except he yells a lot.
Just a little more outbursts. And
right.
Stuff.
Yelling. I mean, I was making a joke about Samuel L. Jackson. It wasn't quite that loud.
But you know, I to this day though, I think he was wearing the gold uniform in that episode, and I think that was probably the more appropriate uniform he should have worn through the whole series because he is the first officer of the ship, and that's a command level position.
In a little after show because he was blue like a science officer, but he should have been wearing a gold outfit because he was an officer.
Yeah, that precedes that.
Maybe they could have split it, like had a blue collar or a silver or a yellow collar and a blue thing, like two different things.
I mean, I know he was doing two jobs at once, but first officer role would be more.
Maybe it could have been
the more important role than the science officer.
Maybe they could have had a two-tone uniform, gold on the bottom, blue on the top. Well, maybe that would have been Wesley Crusher, wouldn't it?
Yeah, it would have looked funny because his uniform being that way. Everybody else is just one color. Everyone else has got just the one color, and he's got the two color. I don't know. That wouldn't have looked right.
Yeah, he probably should have worn a gold one.
Yeah.
But shoulda, coulda, woulda, but didn't.
And he could still work the science station with that uniform. It was just, it would have been a more accurate distinction.
2 years later, Geordi wore a red uniform and could water down in engineering anytime he wanted. So
yeah.
You don't have to say, okay, I got to go to another station. Change to another uniform. It's not quite like that. If you've got the rank, you can go wherever you can go.
Which is why I kind of like the Star Trek the Motion Picture uniforms because they eliminated that color scheme and they just made everybody wear the same grayish. Kind of.
People call them pajamas because they're long and kind of.
Yeah, that to me looked more appropriate.
The actual look and color of them was pretty good because it was kind of uniform and you could just there were the ranks. Like didn't the insignias in the motion picture kind of have different colors on them more?
You talked about the shoulder.
No, the little insignias they had here. Didn't they have different colors on them? Like.
Well, the badges, the Delta Shield had for different departments.
Right, they had different departments. Yeah. That was actually kind of a better system, because the uniforms were kind of one color, but except the admirals. Although I think were there some people who wore orange too? Yeah,
those were probably like the regular crewmen. They wore it sort of looked like a peach or a
because Decker in the middle of the show, Decker changed into an orange one.
Yeah, I think that was in a photo shoot they did before the movie came out, and they didn't wear that through the whole movie
wasn't he in an orange one when he was down there with V'ger and all that?
No.
I thought he was.
No.
Okay. So anyway, we're talking about motion picture now. Let's get back to it. No man.
Yeah. I don't know.
We're way in another movie.
Uniform stuff here.
Motion picture aside for another time. We can actually do a review of that. I want to do the movies too. Yeah. I mean, they've been done a lot on here, but I want to do the movies and how they felt because.
Yeah,
I keep thinking of that William Shatner sketch that's infamous, where the man asks, should we pay more attention to the movies? People should.
Yeah.
There's good and there's not so good, but that's another story. But these are the pilots here. So when No Man Has Gone Before, there's a line in the end which goes with the Spock thing. Okay. Where he says, I believe there's some human in you after all, Mr. Spock. And Spock looks over at him shocked like, there's no need for profanity, Kirk. Like
insult.
The early Spock human is profane and vulgar. Like the worst insult and bad taste, which you hear later. Spock saying emotions and bad taste on Vulcan. That there's a Victorian system of tastes and values, and emotion are irrational and low class.
Yeah.
It's low class to be emotional.
Yeah.
And that's why the Doctor in Voyager, sorry to talk about Voyager, said Vulcan philosophy was kind of Victorian, where they had ways of being that were in bad taste.
Yeah.
Because it kind of covers it.
Yeah,
so okay.
Right.
Here's my thing about the pilots, okay? I actually like them both. I think they're both very different. They're not entirely like TOS, but when you get to Where No Man Has Gone Before, which did air, by the way, didn't it air like the third episode in?
Yeah.
I wonder what it must have been like people in the 60s who were seriously watching the show to see the look of the whole show change third episode in.
Yeah, that's weird because, see, the way they filmed it, or the way the chronology of it is they had Charlie X would be, before Where No Man Has Gone Before, and then after that was The Naked Time, according to the episode chronology.
First.
Yeah, so it looks a little bit off whack, you know. It's like, you know, it's an episode before all of what we just saw, you know,
And the way the
so,
episodes actually go is the Cage is produced first, then When No Man
yeah,
Is Gone Before is fully produced.
yeah,
And they accepted that, by the way. Obviously, they accepted
yeah,
When No Man Is Gone Before as a pilot.
yeah.
But they had the Man Trap first, even though it was like the fourth one produced.
I think so.
Because I
Yeah,
think they produced that, if I understand. They produced When No
yeah.
Man Is Gone Before. Corporate Mind Maneuver was second made. That was the first episode of the proper series.
I think that was actually the third episode after. After they did Where No Man Has Gone Before. I think that was the next episode after
Yeah,
that.
that was the first episode of actual TOS. That was
Yeah.
but they didn't air that first. I
No,
believe the next
that's
episode
weird.
that was Naked Time, was it? Was after that?
Yeah, it was. Yeah, Naked Time came on after Where No Man Has Gone Before, which is
When
weird.
you look around, it's all in air date order now. It's
Yeah,
not
well,
order, so.
yeah, I mean, because actually, if you look at the Stardate order, I think is where they're trying to chronologize it in, is, you know, the star dates, which is, you know, if you listen to the star dates, you can see they're out of sync at the beginning, you know, if you watch them in the way they were aired originally.
Yeah, because it's
You know.
weird. All the other Star Trek series aired as they were made.
That's right.
Although sometimes with Next Generation, Deep Space Nine, they'd change how it was done. Like, for example, with Deep Space Nine, the second episode of it was called Past Prologue. And
Yeah.
the third episode was called A Man Alone, which is an Odo story.
Yeah.
Generally, in syndication, they'll air Emissary, the pilot, or the first episode, I guess pilot, first episode, and then A Man Alone, and then Past Prologue after, even though in the original airing, it was Past Prologue second.
That's right.
I always had this little joke about Star Trek episodes. They give you this big splashy pilot, this 2-hour movie, and the first episode would be kind of a yawn.
Yeah.
Or weird.
Yeah.
I'm referring to, you know what I'm referring to, Next Generation.
Yeah. Yeah.
I would never say The Naked Now was boring 1 minute, but it was weird. But I mean,
Yeah.
oftentimes it's like
Not silly weird, but just weird. You know.
yes,
You know.
yeah, we could debate that, but
Yeah.
anyway, I mean, there's some silliness there. But anyway, that's another show. Let's leave that over here. So the pilots, that's my impression of them. I think that the difference with Where No Man Has Gone Before is that there's a little bare knuckle fist fight inserted into it. There's just enough cerebral left in there to make it interesting to watch.
Yeah.
You're still concentrating on, you know, you're not sitting there saying, "Oh, you're gonna wait for Kirk to fight this guy." You know, people be thinking, "What's gonna happen to this Mitchell? Is Kirk gonna have to kill his friend? This psychologist has died. This tragic figure who admitted she didn't have what it took to be a god." And
Well,
you know,
they're trying to make you understand the conflict within Kirk, you know, because this is a man.
right? They give you a human characterization of Kirk in these.
Yeah, and you're seeing the struggle of him trying to do what Spock suggests, which is the logical thing, and his emotional side, which says he wants to try to save Mitchell somehow, but Spock says it can't be done.
And I should add that DeForest Kelley was supposed to be in this, apparently, but he had been known for playing villains, so they wanted to put him in another show where he was not playing a villain.
Oh.
Test him out first, if I understand Star Trek history correctly, but they wanted to film the second pilot first, and what they ended up doing is they had an actor named Paul Fix. And I don't know if you know anything about Paul Fix. He was actually a cast member of The Rifleman.
Hmm.
I remember my father watched When No Man Has Gone before we were watching the pilots years ago. He said,
there was a lot of actors on Star Trek at that time that were on westerns. Even DeForest Kelley was in a few.
Right. He said he looked at Dr. Piper and said, "That's Marshall Torrance from The Rifleman. I know who that guy is."
Yeah.
Give you a little idea of the Next Generation. We were watching an episode years ago with Dr. Pulaski, and he saw her come in and said, "That's Mrs. Quincy." That's where he knew her from.
Yeah.
If you remember that show with Robert Kluckman?
Yep.
He was in that, playing the same basic character.
Yep.
So he said, "That's Mrs. Quincy on the Enterprise. What's she doing up there?" I was like, that's the same actress, but not Mrs. Quincy. That's Mrs. Quincy, you know. So anyway, so he remembered him as Marshall Torrance on The Rifleman. So in those days, westerns, everybody was in a western.
Yeah.
Gene Roddenberry advertised Star Trek as a space western, a wagon train to the stars. To me, it was not that, but he had to sell it in a time when westerns were the biggest show on TV.
Yeah.
When America had this obsession with the whole cowboy thing, you'd just been through John Wayne, and now they had The Rifleman, they had Matt Dillon, they had Bonanza, the Cartwrights, and didn't they have Big Valley by then?
Yeah. And
They had all these shows yeah. So you had all these westerns and Star Trek. I don't know if there was really an articulation for sci-fi at that time. You know,
considering it was a bold move for anybody to try to put on a TV show, science fiction wise, when they were surrounded by westerns, on every channel. It's like,
when I see Star Trek today, I think, this is a pretty good show. I mean, for its time. But then I have to transport myself back to 65 where, you're turning every station and some guys get a 6-shooter and a hat. And then you turn on this thing and what did in the Cage,
lasers and
the Cage intro where he said where he described them as having zap guns instead of 6-shooters.
Yeah.
I find that funny because we talk about detector circuits. He calls phasers zap guns.
Yeah. I mean, it's like I said, how was he going to sell this so people would be interested? I mean,
I know that's an interesting idea. I'm just saying that him calling a phaser a zap gun.
Yeah. I mean,
we know about Gene Roddenberry and how he is with technobabble.
Yeah, I mean,
you're like, can you imagine if Kirk had said, "Okay, that gun's on stun."
Roddenberry was probably a big Western kind of TV watcher. I bet,
because of that time,
yeah, everybody was back then. I mean, but if for somebody to say, "Look, I'm going to do something science fiction and see if they'll," that's the biggest gamble you could possibly take in the 60s.
I dare say something in the 50s and 60s on television. 50s.
Yeah, it was guaranteed lost money.
Westerns then were what horror has been in the last 20 years.
That's right.
Horror has been the mainstay since the late 80s, early 90s. I mean, it's been so mainstream, the horror thing.
Yeah.
In the 70s, it was a little thing over there. And horror used to be a lot like sci-fi. That was a B-level thing.
Yeah.
Horror movies never had the big stars. They were always like the first movie you got in a double feature or something, and they were not usually very high budget.
Yeah.
Oftentimes, horror movies were Z movies.
Yeah.
But then you had big budget horror in the 80s, Freddy Krueger and Halloween and all that sort of business happening in the late 70s, early 80s. And since then, horror has become, a big budget thing. So in Westerns in those days, especially theatrical Westerns with John Wayne and them were big too.
Yeah.
So I think the Westerns were the horror of that day.
Yeah.
I mean, so like I said, if you want to do a Star Trek today, you probably have to present it as kind of a horror show. Because horror is kind of bigger than sci-fi is now. And Westerns were kind of bigger than anything else. And with sci-fi was
the thing about horror, though. I mean, it's like what hasn't been done in horror already. I mean, to make it interesting.
Well, I'm talking about marketing.
Yeah, I mean, it's marketing. I mean, you get these
how marketers think. It's like it sells, put it out there.
20-year-olds or big-breasted bimbos and stuff getting slashed. I mean, you see that in every friggin' horror.
Right, it's like horror has like 12 tropes it keeps using.
Yeah, I mean, it's so boring now. I mean, look, the latest Halloween movie came out and they got very
What is it, like Halloween 45 or something? I mean,
I guess they figured because they put Jamie Lee Curtis back and it was supposed to draw an audience, and apparently nobody came.
I say that jokingly because it's like Halloween 45, like how many of those things they've made?
Yeah, Halloween's dead. I mean, they just need to stop with that
they
already.
Made so many of those movies, and it's like
they wore it out. They tried to reboot it, that didn't work. They tried to make 10,000 sequels, that ain't working. It's enough.
Time to go sit down.
Go sit down. Close the book.
But then again, hey. Haven't we heard that about Star Trek 2? Time to go sit on it?
Yeah.
Except I don't think so. I mean, with Halloween, what can you really do with those same little 12 tropes?
Yeah. A guy going around killing people. How much? How deep is that?
I was talking about a YouTube video. I got to get his information on here because it would be really cool. He had mentioned something about why would Star Trek use all this time travel all of a sudden? The whole theme is the galaxy. You don't need to have time travel all the time.
Exactly.
But that's a later thing. But with the pilots,
my
feeling about them is that I don't think they're underrated. I think they're both very good. I think they both set up their worlds really good. I would love to see more of the Cage era. We were supposed to, but we didn't get to.
Yeah.
You know what I'm talking about, right? I'm talking to the audience. I'm not going to mention it, but But I would love to see. I don't want to see prequels anymore. I'm tired of them. But maybe do a Cage era movie or something. I want to talk about that.
I wouldn't. If they wanted to do something like that, I would say a TV movie or something like that.
A motion picture.
Every few months, come out with something like that. But as a series, I want to see something after Nemesis.
Exactly.
Okay. Start from there and go on from it.
Like I said, do a TV movie in the Cage and just explore that era a little bit. That's fine. Or even I'd accept a motion picture on it, but not a series.
don't give people an alternative. If they don't want to watch the prequels, they can watch something that's
Right.
continuing the
Because
Prime timeline.
the Cage universe is interesting. I kind of like what it presents. I'd love to see how they
Yeah.
fit some of that stuff into canon.
Yeah.
Like there's this time warp and these hand lasers and needing this
Yeah.
giant cannon on the ship to transfer ship's power when they have phasers. And
Yeah.
I'd like to understand why these transporters are nothing like the ones on Enterprise.
Yeah.
The ones on Enterprise, they work. The minute you pull up that thing they have for the transporter, that little gear thing, it starts beaming up instantly.
And like I said, the thing about that transporter was there was a very simple way they could explain why they were actually able to beam people on there. As remember I was saying, why didn't they put like some kind of a container on the transporter pad, like some kind of thing of water, where they can actually beam somebody in the water, and that would help to bring their molecules back together, sort of like a confinement beam, an early version of a confinement beam in the transporter room. They'll come out wet, but then that explains to the audience, well, look, this is how we were able to make this.
What they could do is they could beam them up in a gelatinous medium, like a mold.
Yeah, put them somewhere where that actually helps to.
So they wouldn't get wet. They just beam up in like a mold or something, and they come out.
Yeah, in some kind of a tank that helps to actually bring.
Right, with some gelatinous medium inside, rather than just have them beam up with thorns stuck in them or whatever.
Yeah, I mean, because otherwise they can use it for just equipment. Otherwise, but if they want to actually beam people with it, it's a riskier thing, and they have to actually add components to the transporter to make it work.
So, another thing about the second pilot, I just want to kind of add into this.
Yeah.
Kirk was going after Mitchell, so apparently he felt he'd become so powerful. They had them beam down this gigantic ammo power supply thing, phaser rifle, which we never see again in TOS.
Yeah.
This epic looking thing. It doesn't even look like a phaser. It looks like some other thing.
Yeah, and it had like 3 cylinders.
Yeah, like 3 power packs.
And he could twist it. It's like, what is that? So it's supposed to be like different settings or something.
I mean, of course, he fires it at Mitchell and does virtually nothing. So obviously,
it's like he's like like Luke Skywalker did in Return.
Yeah, almost like it's almost like that reaction when Worf tried to punch out Lore, and Lore's like,
yeah.
Like, really? That was kind of looking.
Yeah, he put his back into that, and it just
exactly that just I'm not scared, that unintimidated look.
Yeah.
Show me your warrior fierceness.
No wonder didn't break every bone in his hand hitting that friggin' metal skeleton there.
Because Data, people forget he's metal, but okay, we're getting Next Generation. I'm talking about TNG. I can't help it. I guess that's just that's kind of. I came into it as a child. You came into it as a teenager, so that's kind of also our era. But you had a little bit of TOS. I had a little bit of it, but like I said, with the Cage. Okay, so you're thinking about the Data thing again?
Yeah, on that.
I'm just thinking. Worf punches him out, and he's like, he goes.
Yeah, and this is all happening inside of a turbo. If it's like fighting in a closet, I mean, it's like,
right.
I mean, where are you gonna go? I mean, there's no.
So anyway, we got a couple of tangents here already, but your thoughts on the 2 pilots, basically, just your thoughts on the 2 original pilots.
Well, they're very different. Like I said, that's what I kind of like about the Cage and Where No Man Has Gone Before, is that they just feel different. Each one is different. You got not only do you have different actors in it, but even the episodes feel different. The style of it is different. The acting is different. I think out of the 2, I mean, Where No Man Has Gone Before is probably the one I would choose to be the better one. Although there are things about the Cage that I like, but it's just I mean, when I watch the Cage, it's more like I like to see how things used to be on television, how science fiction was done. I mean, you could see the strings holding the Enterprise when it was going by on the screen. I mean, if you don't see the remastered one, if you watch the regular way it was aired, you could tell it was, they were a model, and it was like.
I was going to ask you if that was actually on strings or if it was on a boom.
It looked like it was on a string. I mean, you kind of see the filament a little bit, when they were going by, because actually they were pulling the camera back. The thing was just hanging there, and they were just pulling the camera back.
Like I said, they don't move those ships so everything's lit correctly. That's how they always.
That's right. Yeah, and you could see the camera was slightly out of focus when they had it, when it was close up, and then they pulled it back, and then it went into focus. I mean, you could tell it was,
right. So I mean, like I said, they're writing the book here.
Yeah.
I mean, if you look at the Cage, even now at the time, and I don't want to get into this because I know this is how some people are, because you kind of brought me into this whole thing. A lot of fans would watch something like that ironically.
Yeah.
Like it's cheese. That's why they did Star Trek Remastered, because they wanted to take the show seriously. But when I think about other 60s shows and how model work was done, even that element of Star Trek was pretty ingenious that they were trying to do what they did.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, they were learning. I'm not saying it was dumb or anything like that. I'm just saying for the time.
Well, I know you're not watching it ironically. I'm just saying,
I'm just trying. I like to watch it like sort of like as an historical way of like, okay, this is how TV was done. Like when I watch The Honeymooners and stuff like that, and I see how things were filmed in a live.
You mean like old teleplay sort of things where it's like in one room. And
yeah, and I mean, there's an audience and you could hear the reactions and stuff. I mean, because they don't do it like that today now. I mean, everything.
Actors all can.
Yeah, so I mean, it's nice to see how things are done. I mean, and you see how effects were done and stuff like that. So I look at it as a television historical kind of thing, a medium to see how things.
I mentioned this. I mean, they could have done what they did in animation with Clutch Cargo.
Yeah.
Basically take a still comic book image, cut a little hole in the mouth, and put somebody's mouth in there just yapping.
Yeah.
They could have just had the Enterprise sitting there on a piece of paper and just have the camera zoom into this paper picture.
Yeah.
I mean, a lot of sci-fi shows actually did things like that. Where they built a physical model with full detail.
But what's funny is the generations today won't even take the time to even appreciate something that was made 30, 40 years ago. They'll laugh about it. They'll say, "Oh, that's stupid."
They have ironic appreciation of it.
Yeah, they want to see the CGI. They want to see and I think that's what's driving a lot of these remastered, enterprises and stuff to do that. It's the younger people that want that.
That's what I was saying about when they did TOS Remastered. It was people who were used to that, and I'm sure now younger people who were children when that was done think those CGI don't look good.
Yeah.
I told you about Twister. Young people who are 20, 25 today think the effects in Twister look cheesy. And I'll say, that was soul in its visual effects. When you were running around in diapers.
Yeah.
And
it still holds up today. I mean, I still got that movie. I mean, I watch it once in a while.
Well, I mean, it's almost like you have people with these little microscopes, like, oh, that little pixel's not where it's supposed to be, and it's like, I can't see that stuff. Come on.
I mean, are you watching a movie, or are you just analyzing the movie?
It's a good movie with good with good early CGI effects.
Yeah.
I mean, first of all, even if you have early CGI, a tornado will be the first good thing you create because it's the weather system.
Right.
They're not creating an airplane or anything like that. That would be kind of hard to do at that time without looking foolish. But I mean, even by Enterprise, they did most of the stuff on NX-01 CGI, and it looked pretty convincing.
Yeah, but people today, they don't watch movies; they analyze movies in the theater. They sit there and they nitpick it to death.
Right. What they're doing, they're looking at the visuals. They're not looking at the substance.
Yeah, they're not listening to the story. They're not watching the thing play out, the narrative of the thing play out. And they're too busy like, oh, well, they didn't do this right. They didn't do that right. Just the second they walk out of the theater, they've already got the
right. And, I hate to say this may sound deprecating, but I do blame some varieties of old Star Trek fans for this because they started getting into this way back in the day. Remember in the 90s and 80s, I'm sure you heard them too. A lot of Star Trek fans looking at TOS during the Next Generations era and thinking, oh, TOS is so cornball and old.
Yeah.
We're talking like 91 here. Well, here we got people who were born in 1991 saying, oh, Next Generation's so old looking.
Yeah, already.
So I'm like, you just wait until your grandchildren see the Iron Man movies from today. It's coming.
Yeah.
Wait. They'll be like, yeah, those weren't corny 80 years ago.
Yeah. I mean, the more technology advances, yeah. I mean, that's just the thing about technology.
That's how generations are.
Yeah.
So what's thrilling you now will kill somebody later.
Yeah, and the thing of it is that they got everybody believing that they have to go back and either erase what they did in the past or remaster it so it fits to everybody's.
Yeah, had to bring him up.
Yeah, and it's just, I just see that, this is going to be a problem for, later on down the road where people are going to say, look, enough is enough.
I think basically that's why I'm glad when they put TOS out on Blu-ray, they included the originals. I mean, honestly, I wondered if that was a little bit of a shade throwing over George Lucas. Like, yeah, we're going to do new ones. We're going to kind of keep our old ones, too.
Yeah, because Lucas he didn't keep
he didn't say he destroyed the old ones. Like, you're not going to see those. Those are inferior Star Wars.
Yeah.
Like I said, the Star Wars conversation, let somebody else do that one because that's it's probably already been done. But I use
See,
that.
the way Lucas thinks is the way a lot of people today think about things like that. Is that it has to be.
I was just talking to a friend of mine about that on another level. You're talking about people in music doing this, and we referenced Star Wars with this. He used the example of Luke destroying the whole Jedi history. But there's this whole notion now with people in movies and music, with a lot of cultural things. In order to be new, you got to rip down the past.
Yeah.
You got to annihilate it, and that's what that's what the Last Jedi did. It's like we got the Jedi stuff didn't work. Just redo the Jedi. We got to destroy all the past.
Yeah.
Which is actually a very young, bratty attitude in a lot of ways.
Yeah, well, they tried to cut themselves off from what's been and try to start over with something new.
And like I said, that goes with the philosophy of, oh, well, you can't dwell on the past. Now here's the interesting thing. Star Trek today is saying that, well, we don't want to dwell on the way things were done in the past. It's like, well, if you don't want to dwell on the way things were done in the past, why are you making prequels?
Yeah.
Here's
the thing. You go to any bookstore in America, any library in America, and you're going to find rows upon rows upon rows of Star Trek novels written by authors of all kinds, and a lot of those books are great, and that's material that they could reference to if they wanted to do something new with Star Trek.
Right, and some of these books
don't have to reinvent it.
Even came on the air.
They don't have to reinvent Star Trek or change the recipe.
Already been done.
Yeah. Just do what, stuff that you've ignored all these years. Like there's some books in a Star Wars thing, like the Thrawn, Admiral Thrawn trilogy. That was great. Timothy Zahn wrote that stuff. I mean, why didn't Disney pick that up and do a 3 movies with that? Just take them books like they did with the Harry Potter stuff and just make movie versions of those books. Those would have sold, like crazy, because it create that when those books came out. They had a whole, toy market that came out that sold a ton of action figures based on the books, So imagine if Disney had done that, but no, they had to. We got to distance ourselves from George Lucas,
Sometimes I feel like we're kind of ruining the ends of our blogs by seeming like we're complaining about how things are done today, but it's worth it. And you know why it's worth it? Because when you go back to the old. When you go back to the old shows and you're saying, oh, well, you can see the strings on the Enterprise. Yeah. I'd rather see 1,000,000 strings on the Enterprise.
As long as the story. Yes.
Than to have a fancy-looking show with a crappy story.
Yeah. I mean, I can sit and laugh about things like that, but that doesn't mean I'm not going to watch it because I like the story. Well,
we can reference that right inside Star Trek. Remember how Spock and Logic wasn't getting Kirk and I think it was Bones's admiration of Khan. Yeah. They were saying that, oh, well, there were no major conflicts under his rule, and even less freedom. And then they're like, well, there was none of this. And Kirk's like, gentlemen. Spock's like, gentlemen. Yeah. And they're like, Spock, you have to understand that we can dislike the man, but we can admire him at the same time.
At the same time, yeah.
So, they were trying to give a well-rounded look, and Spock has that cold black and white logic. Yeah. If the guy was just a tyrant, that's it. And with the crew of the Enterprise, they're basically thinking that, well, of those dictators, he wasn't the worst of them at the same time. Looking at it in that way. So nowadays, I mean, if you put out a great story out there in sci-fi, I mean, a really good story that was really good and really positive and really social, but the effects were a little bit behind the times, like you said, I guarantee people would go in there, they wouldn't pay attention to that good story. They would go in there and they would pick apart that it looked old-fashioned.
Yeah, I mean, look, remember, we talk about that detector circuit thing, right? And when you was watching that episode for the first time, your mind kind of like auto-corrected it as you went because the story.
Basically, a good episode.
And that story engaged you. That story engaged you, so it didn't matter what mistakes they made. It didn't matter because that wasn't.
My first thing is that big force field appears, and I'm 7 years old. So I'm like, it's all very exciting. I get to see all this. There's this Q appear in these different costumes, and this thing where you're being frozen, and these jellyfish space aliens mating, and this whole story about this thing. And it's like, this was, I mean, I know that may seem like another young trope. We're making ourselves sound terribly old. We're making ourselves sound terribly old talking like this.
I don't think so. I mean, okay. Let me draw something.
I'm just joking around because
No, let me just say like this: soap operas. Okay, when they first started, they were really, really primitive looking. Okay, but what kept the people watching it was the story. It wasn't,
So,
the sets being,
right with a soap opera. Though.
Yes, that's what Star Trek is like.
What do our older grandmothers always say when they watch soap operas? We're going to go watch our stories.
Our stories, yes.
They don't say we're going to go watch a TV show made with practical effects.
Yeah.
They're going to watch our stories because they want to know about these characters, what they're going to be doing, what their lives are going to be like.
That's right.
My grandmother always described soap operas like this: watching a soap opera with some older woman, and my grandma was like, "I've been watching the show too long."
Yeah.
And I said, "Why?" I said, "That woman you're seeing with the gray hair walking on a walker, she was a young new mother when I started watching this."
Yeah.
And then I realized at that moment how old my grandmother actually is.
Yeah.
She's been watching the show for 52 years.
Yeah.
52 years. And she's like in her late 60s at this point.
She watched new generations get on that show, and she,
right? And she's saying the woman her age was a young mother when she came on the show.
Exactly.
So it's like you've watched from color to black and white, from new wife to grandmother.
Yeah.
Soap operas, they don't end. They kind of go on unless they get canceled.
And that's what Star Trek should be. Never ending, always going on until it gets canceled. It's like, and the stories should keep the audience engaged enough that we would ignore the flaws in the special effects and mechanics.
Like I said,
laugh about it.
They allow us to see Kirk getting older. They showed him having that birthday party, which in Star Trek 2, which I assume was his 50th.
Yeah.
And, so it's not like, okay, Kirk's over 50, gotta get rid of him. There was no ageism there.
Yeah.
It was like these characters are going to grow older, wiser as they grow.
Yeah.
And in Generations, they address that directly. Chekhov, who's a middle-aged man by then, is looking at Sulu's daughter and like, I was never that young. And Kirk says, you were younger.
Younger, yeah.
And it's like, you have to realize that Chekhov first came under the Enterprise like 20, 30 years before those events.
That's right.
Okay, so time has marched on.
Yeah.
That's why I think this new Picard series will be good. We'll see Picard when, maybe the Enterprise is mothballed. As a much older man. It would be interesting because we need to see time marching on and not keep thinking of Star Trek as being, we got to keep it youth-centric.
Yeah. You'll get the youth on there as you introduce new characters as the generations go on. You know what I'm saying?
Introduce new characters, but don't kick them to the curb just because they get a little older.
Exactly.
But that's what America does with child stars too. You start having a little hair somewhere. Well, you're not cute anymore. Bye.
Yeah. See ya.
And that's why America screwed up all its child stars. So, if you just let them grow up.
Yeah.
We've seen that over and over again. Michael Jackson, the entire cast of Different Strokes had that happen to them.
Oh God, yes, that was
that was like a friggin' death knell. And only Todd Bridges survived.
Yeah. That's a whole God. That was
the rabbit hole to end every rabbit hole is the friggin' Different Strokes issue.
Yeah, that's a soap opera in itself. They could do a whole series on what went on behind the scenes with that.
And for such a sweet intentioned show, geez, that was horrible.
Yeah.
What happened? I remember watching that when I was in my 20s and thinking, boy, this show is so sweet and well intentioned. What happened?
Yeah. What happened?
But you realize, hey, that's how it will go in. These kids get a little too old. You know how Hollywood is?
Yep.
Kick them to the curb. Macaulay Culkin, forget it.
Oh, jeez.
Another one.
Yep.
His friend was Michael Jackson. Another one.
Yep.
So we see this over and over again. Like I said, so stop making Star Trek all about being 20 forever because you're not going to be 20 forever.
Star Trek isn't about being young forever.
Right.
It's about facing your humanity.
With the Next Generation, they brought in Picard, who was not a brand new captain.
No, he was a veteran
captain who was kind of near the middle end of his career.
Yeah. Actually, he was right around the same age as William Shatner's Kirk would have been in Star Trek 4.
Right. He was
after all these years of being, in Starfleet,
they could have cast some young 20-year-old, but they kind of said, we want a wise older guy who's had some experience. And Picard's like, I was a wildcat. I didn't always do the right thing, but I had some Nazi stab me in the heart. So I had to learn my lessons. I had my best friend die on the Stargazer. And, I've had to learn my lessons in life. So now I'm coming onto this ship, and now I know my stuff.
Yeah.
For all we know in the Stargazer, Picard might have been an arrogant bastard.
Yeah.
Yeah. But, age and experience changes you.
Yep.
And notice in the movies, Kirk is a lot less, haughty. He's he's more like, yeah, I've got vulnerabilities now.
It's a little more tempered,
I mean, do you think that Kirk in TOS would have ever taken seriously destroying his ship as an option? He did that as a bluff with Beale and Lokai.
Yeah.
But he's like, because remember, he said in Star Trek 2, I don't like to lose.
Yeah.
But then he's realizing sometimes you got to lose a little bit to gain something.
Yeah.
And, that was the whole seriousness of Star Trek 2 and 3.
Yeah.
But, okay, we're into the movies now, so yeah.
Yeah.
How the pilots link into everything Star Trek. You see things that come into Star Trek later kind of there already.
Well, yeah, because the basic thing is about the human condition, which is in everything Star Trek.
Right, and it's amazing how even in The Cage, that was kind of about that aspect of humanity. This man who's bitter, who ends up in the situation where these people are making him relive these dreams of things he'd rather be doing. But then he realizes in the end, sort of, yeah, you know what? I really want to be here. I'm just embittered.
Yeah.
And that's very Star Trek. I mean, so despite all the weird technical things about it you might think are weird, it's still there. And again, the conflict with Spock, with Kirk more, with about Gary Mitchell. Again, that's very Star Trek. So that part is kind of there. They haven't established some technical things, but that aspect of Star Trek is still there.
Yeah. And, when you first watch an episode, at least when I first watch it, I ain't watching it to count how many times they use the number 78 in the turbo lift, when they are, going up and down that, in Star Trek 5. I'm trying to get the story first.
Right. Well,
when I watched it over again, then I'm, it's like, okay, let's see where they screwed up on here or something like that.
Well, except the Detective Circuit, you noticed that right off.
Yeah. Yeah. Because I picked that up.
But like I said, you were probably considering other things too.
Yeah. But I was watching the story, and I didn't make a big issue out of it until I went to school the next day, and I noticed my friends saw the same thing, and then we made a big discussion about it. But, like I said, I appreciate the story first. It's not like, the kids today won't even bother to take the time to watch it. I'll watch it.
I noticed that about The Cage Where No Man Has Gone Before. People see them today, even young kids, and they don't think they're that bad.
Yeah.
I've actually seen young people who are way younger than me, in their 20s, who watch The Cage, and they're like, this isn't half bad. Somebody I remember seeing actually watch The Cage. I was reading something somewhere, and they said that we'd rather have J.J. Abrams do a story like that.
Yeah.
So it proves what you're saying, that people want to see things more like The Cage. Never mind TOS or anything else. The Cage looks satisfactory to them now.
Yeah.
When they were still working things out. So if The Cage can look that way, what are we doing wrong? I think we know.
I think we focus too much on the glitz and glamour of
which the Cage did not have. The Cage was a fly by the seat of their pants thing that way, but the story was very intact.
Yeah.
You can actually follow that story, and it isn't just waiting for the next big practical effect to come up.
That's right.
As nowadays you'll have a lot of films that have stories, and it's like, okay, the story's going to take a backseat so we can spin around and do all this computer CGI stuff.
Yeah.
But the story's going to stop for that, and then get back to the story a little bit later. But that was story-focused.
Yeah.
I mean, you can still have bad stories then, but that was not a bad one. Neither of the pilots were, and they did a good job of presenting the show as it was trial and error kind of developing.
Yeah.
But it developed right off. This is not going to be quite the show that people would think it was not going to. It's not going to be Flash Gordon or Buck Rogers. It was going to be. I was watching this weird commercial the other day on YouTube. It's a long story, but it described what I think of Star Trek as in the beginning. It was always a continent of the mind. I know that's like a weird term, but a continent is this big, landmass with a lot of different terrain and a lot of different people and a lot of different, kind of cultural things that are happening. A continent is a pretty vast thing.
Yeah.
Africa, Asia, Europe, America. I was telling you I'm describing a lot of 70s rock groups, aren't I? Anyway, so, there are actually a lot of groups with those names. So
yeah, sorry, yeah.
Yep. I'm just so it was funny. But anyway, yeah, I was describing real continents. But the thing about that would be is that a continent of the mind fits Star Trek very well because somebody described it well on the 25th anniversary show. The Star Trek universe, space may seem very cold and unpopulated and lonely in real life, but not in the Star Trek universe. There's always somebody there. There's always a different person. And sometimes the differences are very vast and you get to deal with those differences.
Yeah.
And in Star Trek, that always comes around. I mean, in The Cage, there's one point where Pike is ready to break the neck of that Telosian.
Yeah.
Ready to kill him. And then in the end, he hears a story about you've condemned us to certain death and you are our last hope. And Pike's like, oh, well, this isn't some form of trade or mutual negotiation. All of a sudden, he's like, well, okay, maybe I misunderstood these people. You know, they're desperate and they're trying to survive. And that's Star Trek, too.
Yeah.
You know, bringing your human emotions too much into it. Like, he didn't like being held in a cage. It was very Klingon when you think about it. He hated being in captivity. And even they're like, we found that humans would prefer death to captivity, so you're too dangerous for our needs. You condemned us to death. And Pike realizes, you know what? I mean, they did a bad thing, yes, but a lot of this is my fault, too. I could have handled this a better way. So maybe I should try to negotiate with these people. So you see in the end, even Pike learns a lesson.
Yeah.
You know, that they weren't enslaving us just to be cruel. They didn't really feel they had a choice.
Yeah.
So, again, you have that, and that's intertwined throughout Star Trek. You know, the choices you make, the choices you don't make. So I think the pilots, they really aren't just establishing characters. They're establishing what Star Trek fundamentally is as an identity, you know. And you can change what Star Trek is, the look of Star Trek. You can change the way the Enterprise looks. But the things we love about Star Trek are in those pilots, and they're not subtle. They're there.
Yeah. In
your face. Anything you have to say about the pilots after aside from that?
I guess only that I wish that, you know, in some respects that they had continued along, like we were saying about you know, the characters actually learning and not just being just the hero character, you know, like, well, they know everything or something, but these characters, they're fallible.
You have to look at it this way. When you look from the Cage onward, pretty much that's the way that was up till Voyager.
Yeah, I mean,
you know, I mean, we have
I guess in a way.
Now it's not that way. I agree. Now it's now the characters are all, you know, they're either straight heroes or straight villains. You know, you don't.
It's like, yeah, they can be screwed up, but then it'll always work out in the end anyway, no matter what they do. You know, you know what I'm saying?
There's always this little magical mechanic. It's not like anybody has to learn how to do things better, really.
Yeah, it's like you can still do things badly, but in the end, it's always going to work out.
Like I say, even in the Next Generation, sometimes Picard makes a decision to protect them, but it may not be the right one.
Yeah.
And there's debate over it.
There's always consequences, and there's always repercussions or something like that of what they do.
But that's why we need Star Trek, and that's why we love it, because I think, you know, it's the best thing you can do is learn from a mistake. The worst thing you can do is make the same mistake over and over again and never learn.
Yeah.
And that's what we're seeing in Star Trek now. Now the characters are just making mistakes and not seeming to learn much. They just seem to be making the same mistake for drama's sake. In the past, it was more that they made mistakes, but each time they were a little bit better for the wear.
That's right.
So I think those are the lessons we probably learned from the two pilots. Would you say that?
Yeah, I mean, both in the story and then outside, you know, the production and all them. I think they learn from what not to do from the Cage and to do better in the second pilot. So you could actually see the difference. Like I said, you know, in those two pilots, you could see how they learned from the first one and improved in the second one. But I'm kind of curious what Star Trek the TOS would have been like if Jeffrey Hunter had stayed and just kept Pike, you know, and if William Shatner didn't, you know, because he could have stayed, but he wanted to do movies, I guess, Hunter, and it would have been interesting to see if Jeffrey Hunter would have worked out in the series as a whole.
Or even better, it would have been better instead of bringing Pike back as this injured person to have a very live and active Captain Pike interacting with Kirk on a mission.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah.
Well, they did that in the Abrams movies, but let's just pretend for a moment those aren't there, and let's talk about, you know, in the US world, if Jeffrey Hunter and William Shatner had actually met in a show and done a mission together, with Pike being like, even done Talos 4 and being like, okay, Kirk, this is how it works here.
Yeah.
Do this is what you don't do. You know, it's just...
Because, I mean, at that time, he'd have been quite a bit older.
Right, because it was 13 years before.
Yeah.
You imagine a middle-aged Captain Pike coming to a younger Kirk and being like, yeah, this is what you do, this is what you don't do in this situation. It would have been interesting to see like a Back to Talos 4 thing.
Yeah.
And then have the Cage being like a dream sequence maybe or something.
Yeah.
But, you know, it didn't happen, but it would have been an interesting idea.
Yeah, it would have been, yeah.
Have Pike come back totally there, but like instead
like
of...
an admiral.
but instead of... Remember Spock wanted to go back to Talos 4?
Mm-hmm.
Well, Pike sabotaged the Enterprise and wanted to take him back to Talos 4, but he was guiding Kirk along the way.
Yeah.
like we're gonna kind of lead you to why this has to happen or whatever. Because
Yeah.
I want to see this Vina again, and I want to make up for a mistake. Would have been interesting if they'd done it that way, but they did it the way they did it. But
Yeah.
I'm just saying that there were more stories to be told. I would love to have seen number one again.
Yeah. Yeah.
What her story was, where
Yeah, where she went, with her career, I guess, whatever.
I mean, who knows? She might have been captain by then. I don't know.
Yeah.
But anyway, is there any more you have to say on the pilots at this point?
No, that's pretty much it. Yeah.
All right. Well, next week is going to be an odd-numbered episode 19, and it's Jeff's choice. But I'm still thinking of episode 20 because, now that we've gotten up at episode 20, that's a big deal to me. I mean, I can just imagine a couple of years more up to episode 100. I mean, I hope by then we're really splashy. But again, since this is a TOS thing, I want to dedicate this to Captain Foley and Captain Foley, Stuart Foley over at Trek Yards, Samuel Cockling's. And as you can look in a little link below for their newest video. Oh, and we're still trying to get subscribers, so please subscribe to our channel. And I forgot to add last time, and this may work for you too, Jeff, if you're looking for anybody, if you've had this happen. If you want to get notified in your YouTube about our videos, don't just subscribe to us. Click on the little bell below the subscription. That will allow you to see our videos as they come up. Because, how should I say this? We need more viewers! I really want to build this up. I don't always have time. I apologize to watch all you videos out in the Star Trek community, not even Trek Yards. But, I want to try to give us all some love here. So anyway, as we get to episode 20, I'm glad we discussed this whole spectrum of TOS.
Yeah.
I don't know what Jeff's going to choose next time, but
God only knows.
I'll use a Star Trek term. The human adventure is just beginning.
Yep.
So anyway, till next time, live long and prosper. Our Time Warp, episode 19.
There we go.
See you next time.